Hey guys, Dave Bernier talking about agentic design patterns based on the book by Antonio Gulli. We are now at pattern number 4, which is reflection. We're starting to leave the realm of execution and workflow to enter into a more deeper reasoning area of agentic development. The idea of the reflection pattern, like written here, is to have a self-improving agent. You can use two LLM calls in a loop, and you have one LLM that generates some content or some output. Can be code, it can be a summary, can be an article, can be a questionnaire, like we'll see in the example here. And then you have another LLM call that evaluates against some specific criteria if the output of the generator is good enough to go to the next step. That's why it's often called the generator-critic or the producer-reviewer pattern. This is super powerful, especially when we combine it with a memory. The loop, the idea of having a loop is to have some iteration and improving on top of what has been generated before, but combined with memory, it can build on top of what has been generated for a longer span of trial and errors. This pattern allows for a lot more objectivity, like I said here, because of the separation of concern. An LLM doesn't have its own cognitive bias, like they put it in the book, because they have a very single job to do, and the job of the critic is to reflect on something else or someone else's result. So the pros of that pattern is some self-correction because it improves upon itself. You then get a higher quality output, and it can handle some very nuanced tasks because you do have an LLM that's only taking care of making sure everything is on par with the criteria. On the other side of the medal, you have the cons here. Of course, more iteration, more calls, and a loop means more latency because we are calling the same LLMs multiple times in a row. So if it's a very time-sensitive flow, the cost can be a bit higher in latency here and can reduce the user experience depending on what the use case here. Same thing with the increased computational cost and financial cost because you are doing a lot of call to different APIs, so it requires a bit more computing power or to pay a bit more to your provider because you're calling their API quite often. Also, I didn't specify it, but the latency can also come from throttling from the API provider or the LLM you're using because they don't want you to call their API 3,000 times per second. And the last bad side here, the last con is a potential context explosion. You are looping, you want to keep in memory what has been created. This way you are injecting more and more data into the context of the LLM, and it can reach the limit of the LLM you are using. So, like I said a bit earlier, the example we have here is a quiz or a questionnaire generation about Renaissance. I don't know anything more than what I did learn in high school, but I found it quite interesting to create. So if we have an overview of the diagram here, the whole thing is a big loop. So you start with setting the basic prompt, the number of iteration, the maximum of iteration that you want to be doing in the loop, and then you can start it. In the generator here, we do inject only the initial prompt on the first iteration, and then we simply ask it to refine the code using the critic provided. This way, because it's plugged into the memory, we don't have to re-inject directly here. The memory is taking care of that. If we look at the prompt that we're giving it, we tell it that its task is to write a 10-question questionnaire about Renaissance. It should test understanding and not only recall facts, and some formatting requirements here. I did leave it a bit short on purpose because I wanted to be able to trigger some iteration, but it doesn't always do. We'll see with the example. Then you'll see that I'm using the chat node even for the trigger also, but I mainly use it as a logging tool because I want to be able to see in real time all the flow of the output. I can see it in the log, but I do like having it in the chat. So whatever I'm going to type here, it's just used to trigger the whole flow. Then let's go to the critic. So once the generator has created a first version, we tell the critic, we remind it of its the original task that was provided to the generator, the response that has just been generated, and the system prompt, which is a bit of context and an identity that we give the critic. So you are a historian, expert in Renaissance, yada, yada, yada. Here focus, look for questions that are not relevant to Renaissance, just to make sure that it's all on par with the initial requirement. I did ask for high school level knowledge. I don't know if it's gonna be high school level now, but we'll see. And if the questionnaire meets all requirements, I wanted to respond with the single phrase, result is perfect, so that way I can get out of the loop. Otherwise, let's provide a bulleted list of the critique that we are going to send back to the generator. Now, after the critique, we log its response just to see what's going on. And if it satisfies, so if it has the result is perfect flag, we end the chat. If the iteration count is higher, if we reach the cutoff of number of iteration, we end the chat. Otherwise, we increase the iterator number, and we go back to the drawing board. So let's try it out. From the previous run I did, sometime it was able to get into the satisfied flow, the satisfied output right away. Sometimes it took a few iterations. That really depends from time to time. We can play around with the temperature of both LLMs. Like we see here, it did not answer the requirements. So let's see what the critic had to say. Overall lines, oops. Terminology might be challenging. Questionnaire might be strengthened by including a question on social economic change, but it overall meets the original task. So we'll see if it's really perfect or if only good enough. And here we enter in the realm of prompt engineering for both the generator and critic, just to see and make sure that it does answer the need, but that's outside of the scope of this video here. So now we do have a good idea. It's probably going to cut off now. Yeah. So last iteration reached. So that means it didn't satisfy the critique. We should go back to the drawing board and make sure that we improve the prompts here. But that's the idea of the self-improving or the reflection design pattern.